Enjoy tonight. It's going to be really special. Thank you so much. John.
Hello, my beloved friends from California and beyond. It's so nice to be here, especially this time of year as we can feel the seasons turning and the days shortening, and you can feel the desire to be close, to be warm, and yet still to be want to be held, to be in it, to be alive, to be alive to the world and to be watching the world and participating in it. These are all things I think Ada Limon's poetry makes us readier for. As she wrote in her piece in Alta, I write to, to receive and notice the receiving. And I think what it means to read her poems today is to be invited into an enlarged relationship with the world in which we are more connected than we know to each other and to other living things, to the world itself, to the ecosystems around us, to the places around us. As you know, or you may have known from reading that piece, Ada has recently moved back to Sonoma, California, where she grew up, and not just Sonoma, but to the very house she grew up in, and even was writing from the bedroom that she grew up in. This circular relationship to time and to place is not a surprise because if you read Ada Limon's work of the six gorgeous collections from Big Fake World, published 20 years ago, to this gorgeous new collection, the Startlement, which we'll be talking about tonight, her new and selected, you see that this is a poet very much built of a place of a relationship to the birds, to the rivers, to the creeks, to the trees, to the people who are from there. And I think one of the things we come to poetry for is to slow time down enough to remember where we were from and to remember that we are always from those places and to reconnect to them, whether it's Sacramento, California for me, or Turlock, or wherever you're from. Some of the things I think we ought to know about A. Limon is that she was not just the US Poet Laureate, but in a country in which there are millions and millions of Spanish speakers and Latinx people. She was the first Latina US Poet Laureate, and firsts are never a great benchmark for anything, but in this case, I think it is incredibly meaningful, and we'll talk to her about that tonight. She also won the National Book Critics Circle Award for her collection, the Carrying poems from which are included in Startlement. She wrote two books for children, which are just gorgeous. She edited an anthology, which I highly recommend you check out if you're one of those people who is happiest outdoors. And I also think it's worth mentioning that when she was US Poet Laureate, she had a project to install poems in parks, in public parks around the nation. I was recently in Guerneville, passing through Armstrong National Forest, and someone there said, Ada Limon read here recently with Forrest Gander, and my heart just leapt with joy and a tree lover's envy. Let's bring her into the shade of this book club. It's so nice to have you with us tonight, Ada Limon. Hi.
Hello. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's good to see you, John.
It's really good to see you. Thank you. I know we're a California book club, but I have to say, where are you calling us from?
Well, I am actually calling in from Venice, not California, Venice, Italy.
Yeah, it's 2 in the morning her time, and I just want to say, as we talk, this is a remarkable demonstration of the power of a poet's mind to talk and to speak. Let's jump right in. I love this book so much. Your poems give me
I'm
so
so
much
glad.
pleasure, and the title poem and the title just throw off so many sparks of meaning for me. What does startlement mean to you?
Yeah, it was really difficult, as you might imagine, to name an entire collection that spanned your life's work so far. And so I was trying to come up with a name that felt like it gave action to an intention to the work. And I kept thinking about the word wonder and bewilderment, um, and being in relationship. Also, the idea of the world piercing you. Um, and so there's the Shakespearean word, startlement. And I had used it as the title for a poem that I wrote for the National Climate Assessment when I was serving as the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States. And um, as I was putting together the collection, I kept coming back to that word. And I think, oh, yeah, this is what my life is about, which is allowing myself to be touched and moved by what I witness in the world.
Do
And
you
so the
do you
word
remember the
startlement
first time you felt
was
that
the
way?
choice.
Not just as a poet, but as a person, where you were struck with the kind of awareness of your sense of wonder, or that you can recall.
I think that I've always felt that way, but I'm not sure if I knew what words could be attached to it. I think that I always felt in awe of the world, and I still feel it. But I think that there are times where we say, even as poets, that language fails, and sometimes it fails. And so, you have to figure out the way to describe that feeling when the world is moving through you and you feel yourself moving through the world. And that's a particular um, way of living where you're noticing the action of living.
You have this uncanny ability to recall in poems not just about the past, but often in that setting of what it
Mm.
felt like to be without language, or to
Mm.
not have the language that you had as an adult, but to have immensities of feeling.
Yeah.
Do you have any tricks for bringing yourself back to that state of mind, or is that something that you kind of walk around with in easy accessibility?
I'm often feeling that way still. I think that's why I'm so drawn to poetry as an art form, which is that it makes room for language, but also the failure of language, that it gives place for the silence, the weight of being. Um, but I'm always trying to figure out a way to witness the world that's not always naming it, and yet naming it feels like at least a good relational way to be in the world. So I think like sitting with that, like you said, the immensity of everything. I feel that way all the time. I still feel that way.
Do you think you could read the title poem for us?
Yeah, of course. So I wrote this poem for the National Climate Assessment, and I was asked to write a poem that would be on the front matter for this National Climate Report, which is a congressionally mandated report. And I met with a group of scientists and researchers that were studying the natural world and the climate within the United States. And the report is letting us know how we are doing when it comes to climate change. And after I met with all these scientists in Washington, D.C., I went out of the room and was followed by a scientist that was near tears. And she said, I know you agreed to write this poem, but do me a favor, don't make it nostalgic. And it really hit me about this idea that there is no going back. And so that the way we're moving forward is the way we're moving forward. And so I wrote this poem for the planet, but also partly for her. Startlement. It is a forgotten pleasure, the pleasure of the unexpected blue-bellied lizard skittering off his sunspot rock, the flicker of an unknown bird by the bus stop. To think perhaps we are not distinguishable, and therefore no loneliness can exist here. Species to species in the same blue air. Smoke, wing flutter buzzing, a car horn coming. So many unknown languages. To think we have only honored this strange human tongue. If you sit by a riverside, you see a culmination of all things upstream. We know now we were never at the circle center. Instead, all around us, something is living or trying to live. The world says, what we are becoming together. The world says, one type of dream has ended and another has just begun. The world says, once we were separate and now we must move in unison.
I love that idea that part of that awareness is the repair of the separation.
Mm,
Someone just put in the chat, hello from Yakima, Washington. You're a University of Washington alum.
yeah,
I'm reading your poems all the way through again, which is such an incredible pleasure. It's just
thank you.
heaps of joy and wonder and pleasure in the language. I, I got to wondering when you began to miss being out of doors. Because I know you lived in New York City. I met you in 2005 or six when your
Mm-hmm.
first or second book came out. We were standing outside that Cafe Loop on West 13th Street, and
Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, this is definitely someone from California. Let me talk to her. Um, and you're so many light years away from that time
Mm.
in many different ways, which these poems chronicle. But were you in New York or were you in Washington in a kind of incubatory period as a person who was ready to hear not the call of the wild, but the call of connection?
Yeah. I don't think that it doesn't exist in cities. I think it's actually very present there. Um, I think that one of the things that we forget is that, we are nature. Human, human is nature. I think about in my poems in Sharks in the Rivers, which is a poem that's set primarily, or a book that's set primarily in New York City, um, but imagining sharks in the East River. And then there's poems about rats, and there's poems about seagulls and pigeons, and I think there's all these poems where I'm also remembering trees and trees I knew, and there were trees that I remember dearly in Brooklyn. Um, and so I think that there was a time I did feel somewhat separated from nature because I was living in such a concrete world. But at the same time, if you really pay attention, it was everywhere. And there was a seagull. I remember when I was living in New York City and I was working at GQ magazine, and my office was inside the NASDAQ sign. So I could see the text of the NASDAQ over the screen that was in front of my office. And I was the copy director for the marketing side of the magazine. And I remember there was a seagull that used to land on one of the rooftops that we could look out from the art department. And we would name him Stanley. And we loved him. And it was this sort of moment of like everyone needing this connection with this wild thing in the middle of, such a concrete world.
Stanley's in one of your poems, isn't he?
Yeah.
Can you read that poem? I love that poem.
Yeah, I have to
Because
remember which one it
as
is.
a city person, that poem really spoke to me. I thought, oh my God,
Yeah.
there's a seagull that flies by my window every morning at 7:42, and I think it's just him
Listen,
getting off the train going to work.
seagulls are a big thing. Let's see if I can remember which one he is in. Oh, here he is. I'm going to add my glasses as this beautiful Venice lighting. This is the problem with a new and selected. By the time they come out, you definitely need your readers. Hard-working agreement with a Wednesday. I have an agreement with the day. I won't talk too much. I won't be the most complicated minutes in its configuration of hours. Come to the office with me. Stay a while. The woman in the elevator who's in sales is so nice, but she says my name over and over, even when I don't say hers. She says, "Good morning, Ada. How was your evening, Ada? Have a good day, Ada." So my name becomes an advertisement or a product to be bought and sold. I want to take it back from her mouth. I cannot stop looking at that bird out the window. We've named him Stanley. He's half angry, half slow, half bird, one and a half figurine. I want him to live somewhere else, but it's not my decision. He likes the rooftop of the high rise, the hot, soft tar grasp in his claws. He likes the danger. He likes the dirt on his beak. He likes it rough. He wants his flight to be my own, as if wings themselves could be willed. Let's fly south to Monterey, to water, to ether, to air. Everything is off limits. Everything is unreal. Everything is lament and let go. Dear today, I have said too much, yet give me this. I want to be a physical doll, just for now, a stupid, splendid thing, tumbled in to the touchable day.
Oh, thank you for that reading.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stanley, for your grumpy, beautiful self.
Who knew that Stanley the Seagull was gonna be here?
Who were your favorite animals and creatures to watch as a child? Do you remember?
Oh, I definitely always loved birds. I was a big bird person. But also lizards. I really liked, Amy Tan has that beautiful book, The Backyard Bird Chronicles, and she talks in that opening essay about how she didn't really notice birds when she was young because she stared at the ground. And looking for lizards and snakes and little things like that. And I related to that very much. Um, but I think that my overall animal that brings me sort of a straight, I don't want to say spiritual, but maybe spiritual connection it's the fish. I grew up next to a creek, the Calabasas Creek, and when I could see fish in them, I felt like, oh, everything's going to be okay.
Oh, that's so wonderful because there are rivers running, creeks, water running through all of your books.
Everything.
I thought you were going to say horses because you also write so beautifully about
I
horses.
love horses.
Yeah, oh, I love horses. I love touching their noses.
Yeah, and we're going in the Lunar New Year. We'll be going into the Year of the Horse, which I'm very excited about because I do like snakes and I appreciate them. But the Year of the Snake has been pretty intense because the Lunar New Year turned to the Year of the Snake, and we saw so many rattlesnakes. And now I'm looking forward to the Year of the Horse. Let's just say that.
How, as a poet, do you begin to engage with um, other living beings, whether it's
Mm,
trees or fish or lizards or horses? How, one of the things I love that you do in your poems is that you do not pretend not to have a self or an
mhm.
I or an ego or a desire for love or a job or not to get in
Mhm.
elevators. And so we get a sense reading these poems about the life you live, where you've lived, how you've loved, who you've
Yeah,
loved, who you've
yeah.
mourned. And then there
Mhm.
are these other poems in which they're also living beings. Sometimes you're in those poems and sometimes not. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about, as an observer, participant who is of their world, who's in a very dominant position in their world, but does not speak their languages. How do you position yourself and how do you choose to position yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that the biggest thing for me, and I don't know when it happened, but I know that it was a conscious decision, which is to listen. Because I think I always thought connection was based on me talking to connect, you know? And I think I had a moment of like, oh no, this is about listening. This is about receiving, being quiet and watching and receiving and listening and breathing together. And not always making a story of this, not always making it communication with the verbal, tonalities that we have, but instead to just sit and be and listen. There's a tree that I walk by a lot. There's a beautiful live oak down by the creek. And I've just been noticing that every time it has these branches that kind of go like this. And every time I see it, I go like this. Because I want to mimic what it's doing. And I just every time I'm like, and I keep thinking someone's gonna drive past and just be like, what is that woman doing every morning? And I'm just dancing with trees. But it's like responding to to listening to your own instincts that, oh, this is what I need to do, not just um putting my words to something or putting my own narrative to it, but instead being aware of the slippage between my reality and their reality, and that we're all together in this sort of wondrous world that is extremely mysterious to all of us.
A lot of oaks in Sonoma, aren't there?
Yeah.
Such an amazing tree, right?
Yeah, I love them.
So gestural and so expressive. Like when oaks get
Mm.
old and their branches and their crown get super articulated.
Yeah, and then when they lose their leaves, especially with the live or with the valley oaks, they lose their leaves, and then those great mosses just become vibrant green. So you think about this, all of you're used to this, like, oh, it's leafless, but instead it's like as green as it ever gets because those mosses are just hydrated and living and incredible.
We have a question from the cat lobby because you have many dogs and other things in your poems. How about cats? How do you feel about cats? This is from
Mm.
Deborah Ramos.
Well, I love cats. And we actually did adopt two cats. And they were elderly. They were my husband's ex-partner had passed away suddenly, and so we adopted their cats and took the cats home to Kentucky when we lived in Kentucky. And they loved it. They lived out their lives. We used to say that we had a cat retirement home. And yeah, eventually we're gonna get another cat. I think it's gonna be a while. I don't want to be on the road so much, but we'll definitely get a cat. We love cats.
Um, we're going to bring on Matthew Zapruder in a tiny second. He's a lovely poet, author of four books of poems, including The Pajamist, one of my favorites of his books, as well as a memoir, a book of criticism, and an anthology. Um, can you talk to me a little bit about learning to write poetry? You studied at NYU amongst, and this is an insane group of mentors, Sharon Olds, Marie Howe, Mark Doty, and Agha Shahid Ali, among others. Um, what were some of the favorite things that you took from these astonishing goddesses and gods of poetry that
Yeah.
helped you and made it possible for you to write the poems that you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, they were all intimidating and powerful. My very first workshop was with Phil Levine. And it was so scary and terrifying, and yet he was amazing. I went to almost all of his office hours, and I would sit and I'd bring him an orange and chat and ask him what was wrong with my poems. And I think that the one takeaway that felt really crucial to my work was not just from their teaching and their craft lessons, which were in depth and deep and are definitely a core of who I am. I would not be the writer I am today without them, nor the person I am today. But there's something about their willingness to be interested in your own strangeness, that what makes you strange, what makes you feel separate, and that sense of otherness in the world is actually your artistic talent. That's actually your gift. And they could just nudge you in that direction. Like, oh, what's happening here? This is interesting. Because I think that as poets, as any artist, we mimic for safety and to find form and to find like things that might connect. And so anytime, you're doing that, you're finding out how to make a poem. But they were interested in the weirdness. Oh, this is what's happening here. What is this syntax? What's going on over here? And so that was the biggest part for me, was that takeaway. It was nourishing that part of you that was deeply, for lack of a better word, strange.
What a great gift. I would love to ask you to read another poem. I could just sit here like poetry jukebox holding up my candle, but Miles Per Hour to me is one of those
Yeah.
poems that I just feel like it's still on fire. It reminds me of those Philip Levine like text blocks where you have all the entire poem in one long kind of chunk. And it is so forceful and energetic. And could you read it for us?
I'd be so happy to. And it's interesting that you say that because it was, I don't think I didn't write it in his workshop, but I got to read it. I read this poem as part of it was one of the few poems that was in my graduate thesis that has survived, that is still around. Um, and I remember reading it for him, for the final reading, and he was in the front row. Miles per hour. The painted tiles are riddled with blue cornflowers and unnaturally green stems, as unnatural as trying to concentrate on the blossoms covering the bathroom walls. The way when we were driving 66 miles per hour, and each lupin had become not one, but rather one massive stain of purple and blue, like one large bruise along the right side of Highway 12. And the more I tried to find one leaf, one petal, the more dizzy I became, until the search for something simple had ruined its way into nausea, into that throbbing in the middle of my eyes when we knew it was over, all of it. And yet we were still in the car, still going to meet the family. And when we pulled over on Old Sonoma Road under the tree to make love once more, before the parental handshake made love more difficult, more permanent, my head swelled, not knowing whether or not to hold on to the handle or the stick shift, or to shove my foot on the dashboard, or just to remain pinned like that, pummeled in the car seat, what we called screwing, the hard stuff, that time when we were more angry than anything else, the turn on being the pain. And through the car window, I could see everything in summer heat. The oak leaves the tires had crushed in their masculine heaviness, the fungus that grew on the side of the tree, making a shape like a face or a birthmark. And each single thing made me grab you harder, want to be connected to something larger, as if we could swell into the universe itself, the movement of hips propelling us up into some, I don't want to say celestial body, but something as big as that, where we could watch over everything, the towns growing smaller like little painted toys, those giant oaks and cedars turning into a brushstroke of blue and green, small and unrecognizable as these flowers now, painted haphazardly and scattered like the memory itself. The car driving farther and farther down the highway, my face pressed up against the window, unable to discern whether or not I was as much of a blur as the things I passed.
Okay, I can die happy. I've always wanted to hear you read that poem. Thank you so much,
Oh, yay.
Ada. Someone while you were reading says she has such a soothing voice. I could fall asleep to this any day. And I thought we need to call the Calm app and get Matthew McConaughey's voice out of there and put Ada Limón on there to read some poems to us. Matthew Zapruder has been waiting in the wings here. He's a wonderful poet, critic, translator. He wrote one of my favorite poems called Canada, which starts, by Canada, I have always been fascinated. All that snow and acquiescing, all that emptiness, all those butterflies marshaled into an army of peace. Matthew, please come out and talk to us and talk to Ada Limon about her wonderful work. Thanks for coming to the California Book Club.
Thanks, John. It's good to see you, and Ada, it's great to see you. Special guest. Wow, I'm having one of those experiences where I'm just so enjoying your conversation with John that I feel more like an intruder right now. But I'm, I love talking about your poems and love talking to you. So I guess what maybe a little bit of what I can bring to this conversation is just, that I've known you for a long time and I've seen you sort of contemporaneously with this selected poems kind of, I've sort of witnessed your growth as a poet. It's been so exciting and wonderful. So it was a really interesting experience for me to read Startlement because, I'm
Mm.
so familiar with your work and I feel a part of it in a way, that if you don't mind me saying so. And so to sort of have the experience of kind of stepping outside that and like kind of reading as a reader was so cool. And I
Mm.
noticed, and I was thinking about, we talked about this a bit when we did a conversation in San Francisco not too long ago, but I was thinking about the purpose of a selected poems. It's one of those forms that's, in some ways is vestigial. We used to need selected poems because a lot of the time we had no other access to people's work, before the internet. And so we'd carry around these selected poems like treasures, and that'd be the only way we could read. And of course, now we have access to so much work, but the nice thing about a selected poems is it tells a story and it's like the poet gets a chance in a way to tell their story about their work. So I'm just curious before, I don't want to just rattle on. So I'm sort of curious, like, does that ring true to you, the opportunity to maybe tell your own story about your work in some kind of way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, and we had talked about this a little bit of, editing and choosing for yourself, right? Like,
Mhm.
what is it to be the editor of your own new and selected? It's like you are the one going through all of them and being like, oh, these are the poems that I'm going to choose. And I think that for me, every time I put together a book, it's that I'm trying to make a long poem out of it. That's what I'm trying to do. It's so Lucky Rack is a long poem that's connected with many,
Right.
many poems. And so I really wanted to have a book, a new and selected that still did that, that still made this like arc, that still made um, a longer, not just a prose poem, but a poem that felt like alive and like all the pieces worked together.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating because there was things that didn't fit. Um,
Mm.
and I had to let them go, but I also had to be like, okay, they already are in things, you know.
Like
Um,
formally didn't fit or that didn't fit like I mean, or just instinctually you felt like they didn't fit or kind of like
yeah, they just didn't fit to whether it wasn't formally, it was more of um they really were their own worlds.
uh
And um or some of them were part of bigger worlds that you'd have to, if you put one of them in, you'd have to put a bunch of them in, so
right.
it was like that kind of trying to figure that out. So I
Yeah.
was really trying to make, um, it's hard to say story, but I think a narrative of some sort that represented the arc of not just, the poet's life, but the life itself.
Yeah, no, I mean, you feel that reading. It's a very pleasurable reading experience. And I mean, I certainly, as John's piece in Alta is beautiful that he wrote about your work. I thought, in a way, if you want to know anything about your work, such a great place to start or come back to, and touches on many of the things. And of course, there are themes that have been mentioned that we see, there's survival, there's nature, there's I think loneliness is a big theme and
Mm,
like community and loneliness, like sort of and sort of acknowledging loneliness as being something that is part of life. And I think that people can
Yeah.
find comfort in hearing you acknowledge that. But
Yeah.
I also think about something else, which is that one thing I just kept thinking as I read and reread the poems, really, I mean, language itself is that's the thing that attracts all poets. I mean, you are so clearly in love with language, and you have a
Mm.
gift for sort of almost smuggling that love into poems that are like kind of that have like this ease to them and the comfort and they're welcoming. But there is this I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about why it is what the many reasons why you've been such a wonderful poet laureate. And I think it's and why your poems also are so beloved. And I think it's because of this crossing over of the public and private, like the individual self making a connection with the outside world, making a connection with others. And that's a hard thing, and that's a journey. That's a journey that
Mhm.
has to be made, and yet we make it over and over again. And we see that journey in your poems, both
Yeah.
in their content, but also in their like in the form of the language itself, where something that's an individual perception for you. I'm thinking about the new national anthem where you talk about, you start talking about the national anthem, but you talk about your own experience of like having
Yeah.
trouble of singing it or whatever, and like how
Yeah.
that somehow that individual experience travels and becomes public. And I just like adore that about your poems. And like I just felt it over and over again. One place I'll just mention, like rereading The Carrying, which obviously was like a
Mm.
pretty big poem for you and a pretty big book for you. That's a poem that I really think does that. It's obviously its subject matter is very
Mm.
appealing and important to people, but
Yeah.
really it's a poem of imagery. It's a poem of sound. It's a poem, and
Mm.
and the communion is in song itself. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll just
Yeah.
read, if you don't mind, I'll just read the very end of the poem
Yeah.
where you're talking about a mare, a horse, and then you say, her coat thicker with the season's muck leans against the black fence, and this image is heavy within me. How my own body, empty, clean of secrets, knows how to carry her, knows we were all meant for something. That's
Yeah.
song, that's pure song.
Yeah.
And I love I just I and I so I didn't want this conversation to go by without talking about sound and song, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because also you're a beautiful singer too, it turns out.
Oh.
I mean, so yeah.
I love that you brought that up. Thank you, Matthew. And you're always such a wonderful reader of my work. You and John have such a gift for speaking about my work that I can actually read. Because you know how it is when someone talks
Yes.
about your work, you just kind of want to like lower yourself under the table. Um,
Or murder somebody.
yes. Uh, and I find the musicality of poetry not only so core to why I love it, but also so um overlooked
Yeah,
when people are talking about poetry. I mean, people wonder why they feel something. And it's like because it's music.
it's music.
Because it's music, because it may not make sense to you, and you may not be like, oh, this is exactly the poem that I relate to because of every word in it and the syntax works. But no, it's because there's a music that's moving through you, that's shifting your vibration, and that you are reacting to as a body full of
For
blood that's
sure.
vibrating. And like that's an actual thing that happens. Just like when, you play in your band and like just when you see people relate to music. And I think that that's something, I talk about this and I know it's true, which is that, a song, song lyrics, as you know, are waiting for the music to come along. It's waiting for the guitar, it's waiting for the piano, it's waiting for the bass line, the drums. So the song lyrics, they're ready to be charged and supported by all of those
Um,
different sections of the music of a band. And then with poems, the music is all, it has to all be there so that your repetition is the baseline and your plosives are the drum and all of those things are there on the page. And so
Yeah.
it's not just like song, it is a complete song that is on the page, full and whole in its own entity.
Yeah, completely beautifully said. And I'll just say the last thing is I know we mean to I don't want to overstay my guest welcome, but I mean poems, people say, oh, what's the difference between poetry and song? And you said it so beautifully, but also it's simply poems take place in the context of silence, always. They
Yeah.
enter to silence. Both visually, they enter into the blankness of the page, and that's why line breaks, which aren't true there for every poem, but they're,
Yeah.
and they're in dialogue with silence. And I feel like your poems are, they gather us in and they say, yes, you're lonely. Yes, you're sad, yes, you're in danger. Yes, you've suffered or whatever. That's the human condition. You don't have to succumb to it. Sometimes you do a little bit, but that's not permanent. And we're all here together struggling in the same way and over and again. That's a dynamic, but I think it's a hard thing to talk about, and I'm not sure I can articulate in words, but I feel like the music of your poems is in is connects to this dynamic of what they're supposedly quote unquote about. And you're absolutely right. People
Yeah.
think they want content, 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 but that's not what they respond to in poems.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
so yeah,
And
you
I
said it
don't
well
know, and it's
beautifully.
hard to talk about. It's
It is
hard,
hard.
it's hard to
Well,
talk about now because people will say, "Why is that your favorite song?" And people are like, "I don't know, I like it," you know. So poems are the
I
same
can't
way.
forget it. I can't
Yeah,
forget it. I can't get it out of my body, and that's
yeah,
why, and it's anyway.
exactly.
But yeah, we could go on and on, but
Yeah.
we don't wanna, we want John to come back. We love John.
Oh, I love you guys too. It's so nice to have you, Matthew. Thank you for your questions. I've opened up a little bit of a jukebox hour, and there's been calls for My Father's Mustache, instructions on not giving up, the carrying, the end of poetry,
Mm.
the poem about the whale. Do you have
Uh-huh.
any which you would like to read, Ada? I mean, I think after this amazing, rich discussion about music and song and poetry, it would be How to Triumph Like a Girl. That's a fantastic poem, Avery Castillo. Um,
Oof, tough one, tough one. Those are all good choices. Um, because we were talking about musicality, maybe the best one for that is the end of poetry, which is the engine is the anaphora, which is the anaphora is just a fancy word for the part of the line that repeats. Sorry, I just I got excited. I threw my phone across the room. Um, so this is just for that repetition that says like, okay, this is the music. And I always claim that this is a poem that sort of saved me when I had started to give up on poetry. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro. Enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith in our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting, and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun and the drama and the acquaintance's suicide, the long lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego. Enough of the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of can you see me? Can you hear me? Enough I am human. I am alone and I am desperate. Enough of the animal saving me. Enough of the high water. Enough sorrow. Enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me.
that is a killer last line. I love it so much, Ada.
Thank you.
What are your okay, I have a lot of questions. I'm going to try to get to some of the questions that people have been asking. One of them, which I was going to ask you after if you read My Father's Mustache, because that's such a lovely portrait of your father,
Thank
is
you.
that you're also the child of an artist.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you learned anything from being the child of an artist and if you write poetry every day, which is Susan Taylor's question.
Yeah. My mother is a painter, and in fact, all of her paintings have been on the covers of my books. All my covers have Holder paintings, and for this one, the her paintings inside my name, and it's also on the end pages, which makes me so happy. And I think one of the most beautiful things about being raised by an artist is that there's an acceptance of your strangeness of point of view, right? The blurriness, the way that you may not be able to see things the way that other people see things, that's okay. Um, I remember describing how I felt at one point, and I was like, oh, I just feel like I'm watching everything and everything's happening to me and I can see it from outside my body. But then sometimes I can get in my body and I can see it. And I was going on and on. And my mom and my stepdad, they were like, yeah, that makes total sense. And I thought, oh, okay, good. Good. Because nobody else is talking like that. So I just wasn't sure that was okay. And I think that that is a really beautiful gift, is just to be able to support a young person in that way and tell them that the way that they are feeling and experiencing the world it might be different than others, but it might just mean you're an artist.
Yeah, I guess that was something else I forgot to mention in my startlement. I forgot to mention that the self-consciousness and self-absorption has been such a bane of American
Mm.
poetry for longer than America's been here. But like it's been but it's also one of the joys is watch oneself and process experience or whatever. And I think that one way to think about your work too, Ada, is to watch you the ways in which you observe yourself and wonder about your behavior and are confused by your behavior and interested in yourself and also interested in other people. That sort of watching that you just described is like that's one actually way to go into so many of your poems. And I
Yeah,
and I think it's a cool aspect of your work that also really came out in seeing all the poems together for me in this way. I love that. I don't know if
I
if
love
you
that.
notice that too or you think about that too.
I love that because I think there's so much when people they figure themselves out and they're like, this is who I am. And I've always had that moment for like 1 minute. And then the next minute, I'm like, well, I forgot again. I don't know who I am. I'm all these things, and people talk about identity, which is a beautiful thing. Like I love my Mexican heritage. I love who I am as someone, who is in a Californian, as someone who's raised by an artist, as a child of divorce, or all of these things you could sort of put on you, but none of it really makes any sense. And none of it really is who I am as the sort of slippery, soul that moves through the world and is in somehow relationship with other living and breathing things. Like that is something that will always be a mystery and always be indescribable. And I love that part of us, that my brain functions differently than your brain. And John's brain, functions differently than mine. And this is like that to me is a fascinating experience. Um, that we're all these souls and bodies moving in the world, trying to function as best we can.
Ada, I want to read you some comments. There's someone who's writing who said, you met their baby called Ada, who you met amongst the cigarros last year, who's getting big. So at
I
some point, when you go
remember.
back to the chat, you can read Kate Hotler's posts. You know you've made it as a poet when there are babies named after you. Um, or maybe they just have the same name. Jacqueline Garcia Lopez writes, do you prefer the dancing trees when they're full of life and leaves, or when they stand still and are leafless in winter's calm?
Mm. You know, I'm all about the leaves. But that's because they hide things so I love to like look through the sort of web of leaves and see what's inside of them. Um, but I do love in how California we get the we get the green. So the leaves go, but then we get the high grasses and we get those gorgeous mosses. So, you
Mm.
know, the mosses that hang from the trees are just as beautiful sometimes as the leaves themselves.
Brittany Lewis writes, "Congrats, you're amazing. You write in such a accessible way. I think your poems are not only for poets, but also for the general public. Do you think poetry serves any purpose if it is written to be understood only by poets?" That's something I guess you can address as a poet who is read widely, but also read by poets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that poetry can be a tool that's used in many different ways. I mean, I think honestly, there's a lot of power in a private poem that only gets written for yourself and it's never delivered to anyone else. I know that I have saved myself with poems I've written by hand in my journal that will never be shared, but there is power in that. um to be deeply Californian about that, that's some spell work there. um so I think that you don't have to necessarily make a poem always that connects to a larger audience. It can literally be a poem for your mom and it can be powerful. And I think that for me, sometimes I want to connect to a larger audience and I write a poem that specifically will do that. I'm holding people in my mind. I'm holding people I love in my mind. And I love poets, but a lot of the people in my life are not poets. So, so there's always a mix, and yet there are times where I want to write a poem that risks mystery and maybe some obfuscation and maybe some strangeness and some literary allegories so that I can write just to my poem hearts too. So, I think that there's never just one kind of poem, and that's the best part about writing poems is that it's one poem at a time, and each poem can do something different.
Uh, Lorca says, poetry is like faith. It is not meant to be understood. It is meant to be received in a state of grace.
Yes. One of my favorite quotes.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
Susan Lassiter writes, speaking of receiving, the first poem I heard when turning to poetry in 2020 was Wonder Woman. I was in the midst of several spinal surgeries. The poem connected in
Sorry.
powerful and healing ways that stays with me.
Mm,
And another person writes, I can relate. I'm a new poet, only writing for 4 years at the age of 60. I always felt
mm.
different, and no one got what I was saying or how I saw things. I love this. Thank you. Daniel Arias writes, thank you for being here with us. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start writing poetry more frequently and with more discipline, despite having a job and other responsibilities, etc.? What motivated you and kept you going through this incredible and prolific body of work?
Thank you so much for that question. I think that for me, it's I think sometimes you need to know that a poem can affect something. And so my advice would be to write a poem for somebody. Be to write a poem for somebody. And if it's not for somebody, then make it for an animal or plant you love. Think of it as an offering. And sometimes there's that need for us to have the poem be an action. And I think that sometimes we need to give it as a gift. And it could just be a poem for a tree that you really witness and that you have that relationship with. And maybe you just need to go to that tree and read that poem to that tree, but really make it for somebody. And I think that is advice that has shifted how I work, which is to think of it as an offering.
There's a request to read a poem, Ada, that is from a book, but it's not in your selected. It's the
Oh.
Jacqueline Garcia Lopez says, if time allows, could you please read The Contract Says We'd Like the Conversation to Be Bilingual?
Oh, it is in here. It is
Oh, it
in
is
here.
in here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you possibly read that? I think it would be
I would
so
be
nice
so
to
happy to.
just get close to the end with a reading as an offering to There are a lot of questions. I'll try to get to them, everyone. But yeah, let's hear you read that wonderful poem.
The contract says we'd like the conversation to be bilingual. When you come, bring your brownness so we can be sure to please the funders. Will you check this box? We're applying for a grant. Do you have any poems that speak to troubled teens? Bilingual is best. Would you like to come to dinner with the patrons and sip Patron? Will you tell us the stories that make us uncomfortable, but not complicit? Don't read us the one where you are just like us, born to a greenhouse garden. Don't tell us you picked tomatoes and ate them in the dirt, watching vultures pick apart another bird's bones in the road. Tell us the one about your father, stealing hubcaps after a colleague said that's what his kind did. Tell us how he came to the meeting wearing a poncho and tried to sell the man his hubcaps back. Don't mention your father was a teacher, spoke English, loved making beer, loved baseball. Tell us again about the poncho, the hubcaps, how he stole them, how he did the thing he was trying to prove he didn't do.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Donna DiCello writes, Ada, you were the first poet I studied with at Fine Arts Work Center many years ago. You helped me from my poet heart. Thank you.
Yay.
I want to go to a question from Eli Becerra who says, Ada, you were an inspirational poet. I got emotional because of the shared experience within the Latino community. I get happy chills every time I hear you speak about poetry. As a first gen Heritage University student coming from Yakima, Washington, what advice do you give when writing a poem involving shared experience from your culture?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that was hard for me at first was wanting to sort of celebrate my Latina heritage in my work, but then also really wanting to have the freedom to write whatever I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure where I belonged in that spectrum. So when I was writing my earlier poems, I was dealing with a lot of that. And then I realized the biggest gift I could give myself was the freedom to write whatever I wanted. And it meant that sometimes shared experience were shared, and sometimes they were deeply individual. And that we talk about this in the Latino community quite a bit, which is that there's no one way to be Latino, right? We, as a Chicana, like I have more, Califas, California experience. And so you need to, for me as an artist, figure out your way into your specific music that then opens the door for others to see, oh, that I get. And so it's not about sort of building necessarily a collective experience, but your view of your individual experience that will allow others the freedom to witness their own.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Sarah Vogel writes, by the way, to Matthew, says, I love your poem. It was Summer, the Wind Blew that you wrote for Ada's Poet Laureate project, You Are Here. Do you two want to talk about working together in that way?
It was one of my favorite poems. Putting together an anthology was quite a big lift during the laureateship, and I was so grateful that what I did was write to all these wonderful poets that I knew that were working on poems about the natural world, working on poems about place, and say, "Will you write an original poem for this?" And I can't tell you how grateful I was when Matthew got back to me and so many of the incredible poets got back to me and said, sure, sure, I'll write something. And so that was that collection, an anthology called You Are Here, Poems in the Natural World, is one of my, it's really one of the most favorite things I've ever worked on.
It's amazing you were able to pull that off during that time. I mean,
You know,
creating an anthology is like just the emails alone, as John himself knows from lots of experience. My God, it's enough to drown in it, and you did it with such grace. But it was so it's nice to be. It's just this gathering spirit you have, Ada, and John, you have it
Mhm.
too. Like pulling people together. I'm a selfish person. But you are big gatherers, and I think we need that a lot. Gatherers of heterogeneity, gatherers of quality. And so the fact that you were able to do that and around a topic that it was certainly super important to focus our minds on, our poetic energy on. So yeah.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
ask you a few more questions, Ada. Thank you,
Yeah.
Matthew, for what you just said. Is Sonoma Valley the most inspiring place to write poetry for you? That's from Lisa Anand.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I think for me it's really incredible. I think that there are two things that are happening to me now that I'm back and living there, which is that I can write poems or I can go into it. And so there is some moments now where a lot of my poems are remembering that place. And now that I'm living there, I think I'm just gonna pull my tennis shoes on and go into the woods, go into the hills, go into the mountains. So sometimes I get distracted by beauty. But yes, it's still the most inspirational place for me. It feels not just like a place where I'm from, but a place that gives me a groundedness that I don't know anywhere else.
Pete Follansbee writes, "This has been so cool and special. I've read just all of your books, Ada, except for the new one, Startlement, and now I'm making my way through Matthew's books and poems that insist on being read more than once, and I think slowly unveiling themselves. You're both poets of revelation. Thank you so much for writing
Mm.
and for being here together in this evening." Small question. I want to believe that poetry can affect change, writes Heidi. In this time of such deep division and turmoil, how can poetry
Mm.
make a difference?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question. And I've spent about 3 years trying to answer it. And I I think, you know, I'll say this. I do think it makes a difference. And I think it can make a difference just on an individual basis where it just saves us. I think there are moments where you need to write that poem that is so rageful and so angry, and writing it helps you heal in some ways, or it gives you courage for larger action. It gives you courage to take to the streets. And then I also think that poetry can be galvanizing in a way that feels um, like it's actually meant for us to gather around. Not all poems do that, but some poems do that. And I think right now we really need to gather. I think we really need to remember our better selves, our better angels, if you will. And I think that for me, poetry is a place to gather strength and to keep asking questions and to keep being curious. And I think we need places for that. I also will say we need a secular, sacred language so that it is not religious, and yet it is incredibly formal. It has music, it's galvanizing, it's collective. And I think that poetry is that place to go to when we have too much of political rhetoric, too much of thinking that's uncertainty. And poetry is instead that secular, sacred language that we need to listen to and to not only write and read, but to celebrate and share.
It cannot be said any more beautifully than that. I'd only add that obviously we're in a time where there's so much language is being done to so much violence is being done to language and to us through language, among and also in other ways. And a poem pushes back against that. It's precise, it's attentive, it's alive in language, and the only way we're going to be able to start resisting is by taking our language back.
Hmm.
And so when you talk about the sacredness of language, it's that too. It's like no, you can't have our language.
Yeah,
It doesn't belong to you, evildoers.
yeah,
So I think poets, how can I make a difference? It's anytime anybody writes a poem, they're thinking about what things mean and what it means to say something and what the consequences are of speaking. and
Yeah.
writing. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. So all of you who are writing poems out there, you're doing the good work. You are making a difference. You're preserving something. You're protecting.
Yeah.
Oh, there are a lot of questions unanswered, but as Elisa Roner notes in the chat, it's 3 a.m. and she's so present. And I thought, yeah, what secular priest is available 24/7, all the way from Venice? Ada, you've really enlarged our hearts tonight and just given us so much pleasure and happiness and connection with these poems and your readings of them and your descriptions of you becoming who you are. I'm so grateful for you joining the California Book Club and you too, Matthew, for what you've brought to the table tonight. It's been a really beautiful conversation. I can't thank you both enough.
Thank you so much. It's been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure. Really,
So
truly.
happy for you, Ada. Congratulations on your book. And it's great to see you,
Thank
John.
you.
And thank everyone
Thank
for
you.
being here too.
The book is Startlement, New and Selected Poems, which I think should win an award for most beautiful end papers as well. I thank
Yeah.
you for highlighting your mother's work. I saw
Yeah.
this and
Thank you.
my heart just sort of swooned.
Yeah.
I think someone from Alta will come and walk us out.
Okay.
Yes. Hello there, Beth.
Hi, guys. This was incredible. Thank you so much.